Abstracts? Cheryl?
General fund this evening is $458,584.84. Highway fund, $106,091.66.
Motion to approve.
One thing I'd ask the board to, what I'd like to do is separate check number 1521 and 1522, and first of all, vote on the entirety of the abstract without those two check numbers. So I'll do that in the form of a motion.
Where are you? What are they for?
1521 is an amount of $26,322.55 for CNS Engineers, and the other one is for John Fisher Construction. Three amounts, which equal approximately the $32,000 one, $28,000, $747, and then the $6,917.
And what are you suggesting?
Well, the motion is that we approve the abstract without those three checks, and we vote on those separately.
I believe we need a discussion on this before we go further.
Well, the first thing is for John Fisher Construction, who's been a resident who has requested that money be held back because the project has not been completed yet, to satisfaction of the resident, and also I had an opportunity to go visit the property, and the final completion of it I don't believe is worthy of paying the invoice to John Fisher Construction, and that there's still work that needs to be done on it, some grading, so it can be mowed and replaced as the resident had it previously to the work being done on their property.
I believe, though, that it's not to hold back nothing more than $500 on the punch list to complete that part of the project.
What specifically? What project are we
This is
talking about?
I believe it's Palm Summit.
Palm Summit. Well, that's the first issue that I have with Fisher Construction. The second thing I've talked to the comptroller about is that there were overruns in the amount of $29,782 to be exact. I think the POs and the estimates were $37,000, and it's they've submitted an invoice which is $29,000 more than what was projected. And I have questions on that.
Mr. Would you like Mr. Whitman or someone?
I'm happy to talk about that.
Sure.
Try to help and be informative.
I'd like to say, that we've been meeting, the Drainage Committee has been meeting quite regularly. We met this week, we met last week, and the projects are thoroughly discussed, and what we get are estimates. So you're concerned that...
I don't care about the, my question is the estimates. I don't have a problem with the estimates. The problem is there's $29,000 of overruns. $1,000 or $2,000 is what I could see. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's important to understand. It's important, I think, for everybody to understand how the contract is set up, why it's set up the way it is. We have a labor and equipment contract. In other words, we pay the contractor for what he does. We pay the contractor for what he does, and it's not a situation where we are designing a project before we get started. Very often, in a typical construction project, you will have an engineer and a surveyor go out and survey, do a topographic survey, and you'll actually have an engineer lay out the system that's going to be used. There'll be drawings prepared. And at that point, you really have a very, very good idea of what a project is going to cost. And it is reasonable to at that point, pretty accurately estimate the cost. We're not using that approach here because it's been felt that, and we certainly recommended this approach, but we think it's important not to spend so much money on engineering, but really to spend the money on the construction and the design and the layout of the projects that are being done in the field between our office and the contractor. The first estimate that we came up with, the first two estimates that we came up with were for John's Landing at Grandview and the pastures. And they were without the experience of actually getting in there and doing one before. One was for $20,000 for John's Landing, and one was $15,000 for the pastures. And I think that's where the number overruns are that you're talking about.
Correct.
When we were asked to do these estimates at the Drainage Committee meeting, I explained to the committee that I'm happy to do that because I think it's important to keep track of how much it costs. I think it's very, very important to keep track of our estimates going forward. And I told everyone in the committee meeting that we would not be able to do a very good job in the beginning. But as time goes on, we'll gain a considerable amount of experience, and our estimates will get better and better and better. And we will not need to do those plans at much higher engineering expense. And I would like to point out that we've been doing exactly that. The two that you're talking about were the first two.
Right.
And let me continue, please. Jeff.
Okay,
I can only answer this question by giving you our full experience.
Okay.
Okay?
And my question not about your bill is about Fisher, but go ahead.
That really, it is our estimates.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we, along with Fisher, came up with those estimates. So I don't think it's appropriate to penalize Fisher for doing exactly what he was asked to do. In the case, the next project we worked on was the crossing at Joss Farm. And we estimated originally that that was going to cost $25,000. We provided the outfall for that drainage system, which was the first step, which was a relatively long swale across the farmer's property. We got permission to do that. And then to put in the same type of a system in the rear yards to try to do a better job of drainage. We did that swale first. You always do the downstream work first. And when we got to the location where we were putting in the French drain, we found there was only one there. It was buried. It had no outlet because it was below ground. As soon as we were able to get there, we opened it up. The entire swale worked great. We were able to just smooth out on top of that French drain that already existed, and we were able to complete that project for $5,800. So $25,000 estimate, $5,800 was the completion cost. We did a project at Rosewood, which you haven't received the bill yet. I'm trying to get you information so you have to be completely up to date and be fair overall. At Rosewood, we estimated $10,000. The project was $7,000.
That's not relevant to the question of these invoices.
It is because it's important to recognize that it wasn't Fisher that came up with these invoices. It was our office. And we're doing that with very, very limited information.
But
one more. I've got one more. Saddle Creek, which we just completed, we estimated at $30,000, and that will come in at less than 21. So overall, it's our estimates, not Fisher. Overall, if you total up all of our estimates, $107,000. Total up the actual cost is $102,000. So we're ahead of the game now. And the way we actually described this process, and the way we went through this process with the Drainage Committee was to try to make that clear, that we would gain experience, and that we'd be able to do a better job predicting how much these things are going to cost. And that's exactly what's happening. And we've been able to take advantage of situations where things work to our advantage. And in some cases, like the pastures and John's Landing, they were a much more complicated project than we estimated, than we anticipated. Those were more expensive. There are going to be pluses and minuses, but it's going to all even out in the end. And the approach that we're using, which is to try to minimize the engineering effort up front, we think is valuable to the community. And we endorse it wholeheartedly. And we are working to the benefit of the community.
okay. So for those three, but it's correct to say for those three particular projects, there were overruns of about $30,000. Is that correct?
No. Again, I want to try to make it clear. We had very, very rough estimates based on very, very limited information. It's not a typical estimate where you've got design plans, where you've got a survey. We're trying to do a reasonable job using very, very limited information. And we are getting better and better at that, and the estimates are going to get better. We will make some, there will certainly come across situations where things are harder than we anticipated, again, because we're not doing detailed plans, we're not spending the money on that. It's more of a field design process, which I think is much more efficient than what's designed. But yes, the first ones were high, but I don't think it's appropriate to withhold payment from Fisher, because he did a great job.
So
So, the estimates came in at 107,000 total.
Yes.
And we've actually spent 102,000.
That's right.
So we
Well,
stayed.
the bill, when all these bills are submitted, the total will come to about 102,000, yes.
That's not the abstract we're voting on.
I understand, I'm trying to, Jim, you wanted a question you had, and I'm trying to give you as complete an answer as I
Well,
can.
I wasn't asking you a question, it was a statement. That we're voting on an abstract that's got one check for Fisher and there's $30,000 overruns.
So I thought it was an explanation.
But are we not looking at holding back $500? Is that not the issue?
Well, I have two issues. Those are two separate distinct issues. One for the $500 and then one is the overruns. So there's,
Well,
Madam Secretary, I'd like to explain that one too. It really wasn't up to Fisher not to do that. It wasn't his decision. It was the Drainage Committee's decision initially. And after going looking at it carefully, we decided it was appropriate to fill in that one location. So the town is authorizing Fisher to go back and do that work at the drainage contract at the cost of the town. There was some debate about whether that was appropriate or not. The committee is struggling with, how far to go with these projects and how far to go with the restoration. A lot of work was done there at Palm Summit. A significant amount of work that was done to greatly improve the appearance of that location. And there's a debate going on about exactly what's appropriate and what's not. And again, Fisher did exactly what he was asked to do. And now he's going to be asked to go back and fill in that tire track that he left.
okay. So we have confirmation he'll do that.
Yes.
Very good.
Where are we?
Well, the motion was to approve the abstract minus those two checks.
And then is there going to be another motion to deal with the two checks? Is the question, I think.
There's going to have to be if somebody wants to bring a motion.
Okay.
I
So
don't
think that was the
think, discussion, I don't think it is necessary, based on the explanation that's been provided, to withhold this and to approve it separately. The Drainage Committee as well, within its budget, we have been trying to get to as many projects as possible, to satisfy as many people as possible. When questions are presented to us, we go out and we reevaluate. If you talk about Palm Summit, we are talking about a detention pond there, and a detention pond was never built to be a lawn. So there are tire tracks. We decided that that particular homeowner does a very nice job of keeping that Palm Summit pond looking very nice, and he had an issue with that. We certainly want to continue cooperating with that, so we decided that it was certainly worth it to ask Fisher to go back. So I don't see the need to withhold anything at this point.
And like I said, I have no objection to the projects. They're good projects. It's the cost, which is shocking.
Well, I thought it was explained quite well, even I understood it this time. I agree, I don't see any reason to withhold the funds.
And I agree as well. Do you want to make a motion to hold those checks back, or did you?
I already did, but I think it failed.
No one has seconded it, so we're back to the original motion of the abstract that's on the table to accept it.
I'd like to make that motion to accept the abstract in its entirety because there's been no inappropriate billing here.
Second.
Mr. Jennings?
Yes.
Ms. Zimbrano?
Yes.
Mr. Coral?
No.
Ms. Blakey?
Yes.
And I'm going to also say, due to the fact of those two checks,